Many of you who have been studying for a while are going to recognize that this is the connector placement rule. We have a not technically a conjunction, but a word like however or though that is kind of floating somewhere in a sentence, and we need to place it in the right spot. The first thing we should always check with these is the semicolons. Do we have complete sentences on either side? And if we do, then we need the semicolon right away. So let's take a look at that. And when I do that, I'm mostly going to be overlooking the word though. It usually is just an extra thing. In A, it certainly is because we have a comma, so it's kind of like an extra clause. The C is more complicated because there's no extra comma there, so it's technically not separated from that next piece, but let's just cross that bridge when we get there. Okay, jetties, long, narrow structures that extend from a landmass into the water, are often constructed to protect coastlines from erosion. Oh, I didn't need to read that. Never mind. Jetties can sometimes have the opposite effect. That's a sentence. Sounds good. So yeah, check. Obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion in some areas. That's a sentence too. So there we go. We have two sentences. So it's not going to be B. It's not going to be D. Though there is a temptation here to pick maybe B or C, and it's because, again, there's no comma afterwards. So let's take a look at it. Yeah, let's see how I'm going to explain this. This is hard. Jetties can sometimes have the opposite effect. Though obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion in some areas. That, I tried to read it without the pause, because if we wanted to put though after a comma or a semicolon and then lead right into obstructing the natural flow, that though becomes kind of part of the clause. It's not just like an interruption or kind of a transition word in the same way as when we see it in the transition questions. But then that clause has to behave in certain ways, and it's just not doing that here. It's the meaning of these sentences is really important at this point. Jetties can sometimes have the opposite effect. What are we then contrasting with here? Though obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion in some areas, that sounds like a bad thing. Increased erosion seems bad. So if we want to do the opposite effect, right, the jetties are trying to protect things. So it starts off good. Then we're switching basically with the second sentence to something bad. So that's where the contrast is happening. If I were to pick B or C, that contrast is now kind of happening later. But notice the last little clause or sentence or whatever you want to call it, obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion. That's also bad. So between these kind of like two parts here, we don't really want to have a contrast. We're continuing the same thought. So that's another reason why B is wrong, and that really gets rid of C. That's the final straw there, leaving us with A. And to be really clear about what's happening, this is kind of what the dumb version sentences are. Jetties are often constructed to protect coastlines, but jetties can sometimes have the opposite effect. For example, obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion in some areas. That's the sentence, right? Where's the but? It's right here, right? It's between those two ideas. Now, even though we are putting the word though at the end of that kind of like second part, it still has the same function as if it were a but right at the beginning. It is still contrasting that second sentence, starting with jetties, with the first sentence, which also starts with jetties. But there you go. You see my numbers there. So that's what's happening. And so when we do these connector placement questions, there's two things to think about. Just what's the structure of the sentence? Where do we have sentences? Where do we have extra clauses? Do we need a semicolon to divide this thing up? Most of the time, yes, you will need a semicolon, but not always. Then beyond that, where does this contrast actually happen? This is where it starts to feel more like a transition question rather than a grammar question. We need to think about the ideas in the sentences and understand where that contrast is going to happen. And words like however and words like though, they can float in a sentence. They can be anywhere in a sentence, but no matter where they are, they always contrast with the previous sentence, right? So go back to where there was a period. That's what it was contrasting with. This is complicated. I have a lesson on the connector placement rule on my channel. Check that out. But yeah, this is a hard one, especially for the first module. We don't really see this here, but it's definitely something you could see on some hard modules later on the test.